What is going on YouTube? Chrono here and welcome back to another Tower Fantasy video. So today we're talking about Ruby, a new character that's popping up with the 2.0 release of Vera that a lot of people are, I won't say skeptical, but are questioning, should I pull this character, should I not pull this character? We're going to be talking about that today. So two very important disclaimers before we get started with this topic. Number one, I am not the end all be all with information. You can make your own decision ultimately when it comes to spending money on a video game versus investing your resources, because again, time is also one of those resources we talk about on this channel. It is not just money, it's also time. Just because you don't spend one doesn't mean you're not spending the other. Usually it's kind of a balance between the both of them. So it's up to you ultimately whether or not you decide that you want to invest in the character at the end of the day. We're just here to give you all the information so you can make that informed decision on whether or not that's going to be something that's going to be beneficial for you, and understand that it's not always going to be the same for everyone across the board. Everyone has different reasons, everyone has different means and different time when it comes to this game. So please do not just go based on what one person tells you. Go ahead, get a second opinion, look around, see if it's something that's really going to work out for you. The second is, at the end of the day, if the character is ultimately going to be what makes you enjoy the game more, it doesn't matter realistically how meta that character is. It's a gotcha. Characters are going to get power crept. They're going to continuously release new characters that are going to be shiny and new and make changes to the meta overall. You are going to be able to complete a large, vast majority of the game, if not everything, for the most part, with the characters that you're able to get on your own. While you may not be meta, you can still optimize, so do not worry if you're not jumping towards the meta units when they pop up. It's not going to be you're not going to ruin your account by not picking up certain units, so on and so forth. There'll be reruns, you'll have second chances, things will move into standard banner, so I would not worry too much. However, with all that being said, Ruby, should you be pulling for her, should you not pull for her? So I've seen a lot of videos pop up recently, I guess over the past 24 hours, on should you pull for Ruby, should you not pull for Ruby, how she works, so on and so forth. And there's a couple of things I'm noticing it's a pretty standard thing here as far as characters go. And I think this is something that only really exists in the global version of the game because of the characters that we've had up until this point and the way that they're actually displayed. So what am I talking about? So let's pull over Ruby and let's take a look at her. This is the CN version of Ruby. So there's a couple of things I want to talk about here. First off, that yes, this is the CN version. We're probably going to get a different version of Ruby. What hasn't changed between the CN versions and the global versions of characters is their actual toolkits. Their toolkits still work the same. Their values have changed, but the toolkits work the same. And honestly, with Ruby, that makes things very, very simple because Ruby does not have a complicated toolkit. Ruby's toolkit's actually very simple. And that's why when I've seen people explain this character the way they have explained her, I've been kind of weirded out because it's not really that complicated. So what happens in a lot of situations nowadays are people are looking at characters like, is this a shatter character? Is this a DPS? Are they my main DPS? So on and so forth, right? Well, realistically, as comps start to get filled out with their proper characters, like certain elements, you don't have a shatterer. You don't have a main DPS. It's based on how the comp actually plays. Some comps are quick swap where you're just using their skill, trying to get their discharge and enough build up for the next discharge and moving on to the next character as you're rotating around and around and around and around and around. When I say quick swap, I mean something like, I think it's like Ice Comp currently over on CN is very much quick swap where you're just using skill, swapping character, using skill, using discharge, swapping character, using skill, using discharge, getting a little bit of a charge, swapping character. It's very fast paced, very flashy because you get a lot of skills out. Where something like, let's say, I guess Volt Comp is a good example of this. Currently on CN is not as spammy in a sense. You're actually, you're popping Nemesis totems down. You're, getting your Lin buff up, and then you're switching over to Spear Boy, sacrificing some of your health and doing a crap ton of damage. He's kind of like, if you're someone who's used to playing Genshin, he would be the equivalent of like your on-field DPS, right? Like that's the character that you have hold the chips that are going to be active versus the characters that are holding the chips that are, continuous or passive or background use. When I say active versus passive or background, basically chips that still have their effect in effect or still working while you're not using that active weapon versus other chips you have to be actively using the weapon to get their benefits. It's like the difference between I would say Ruby's chipset, which we'll talk about in just a moment here, versus the Samir Crow combination. You'll hear from a lot of players that's what you really want to have on your primary DPS weapon, which is what it's referred to in most situations, right? So let's talk about Ruby overall. what's Ruby's role in the actual fire comp? What does she actually do? Well, though it says S in shatter and only A in charge, Ruby is the core of the fire team. Realistically, you want her discharge, you want everything to be buffing, and then Ruby to be on the field and be pressing buttons. She's going to be like your left clicker, essentially. The nice part about Ruby is she's not very complicated. Realistically, the way fire comp's going to work out right now, and I'll give you guys a bit of an idea. Let me pull over the simulacra. Let's grab Cobalt. And then I'll talk about why this is the choice that I made, but we're going to grab, where is he? Where's the boy? Zero. Here we go. All right. So the way fire comp is looking at the moment, actually, I guess it's not fair not to grab Claudia as well, because realistically, Claudia is actually the better choice, but whatever. Realistically, if you're playing fire comp, what's going to end up happening is you're going to start with Cobalt. You're going to press Cobalt's 1. You're going to dash attack. And what that's going to do is going to get Cobalt's, her 6-star rolling, which is her actual burn. You're going to get her step attack, or her Iron Scorch rolling from using her step attack. And then afterwards, you're into Ruby. Now, because you have C6 on Cobalt, because Cobalt's an expensive unit, if you really want to use her, you basically need her 6-star all the way up. You're able to maintain those damage, or those burns, while using Ruby and dash attacking like once every 10 seconds roughly, right? So it's nothing too crazy there when it comes to Ruby. It's really easy to maintain all the buffs you get from Cobalt while just playing Ruby. Now, Ruby, if you look through all of her advancements, you'll see that it's just damage based and cooldown based. Now, we can assume from what we've seen so far when it comes to it, because even if we're looking at the test servers, technically speaking, which I have access to, even if we're looking at the test servers, that doesn't guarantee what the character is going to look like when they first release. So I don't want to really talk about test server values because they're subject to change. The one thing that hasn't changed at all across this process has been the overall toolkits. The numbers have been toned down, but the toolkits have remained. Even when we thought major changes happened to a character like Frigg, turns out it was a lot of it was mostly just what's what I'm looking for, it was mostly incorrect translations and descriptions missing certain pieces, when in reality it was mostly just her her dash attack was toned very heavily down. We're probably going to see something very similar to this when it comes to things like Ruby's discharge. Her discharge is absolutely bonkers. We're probably something like this when it comes to her advancements with some of these damage, or some of the damage that we see here, but likely it's going to still work the same. You're still going to get Cobalt's burn up, you're still going to dash attack, and then you're going to be moving into Ruby, where you're going to be throwing out Dolly every once in a while. You're going to be using her normal attacks. I believe it's what her nope, not Falling Flames, Imprisonment Cage, attack, hold attack, which is very, very nice. You'll be using her skill, Sparky Crash, and then just putting out tons and tons of flame damage. It's really, really straightforward. It sounds like a lot, but realistically, if you look through all of our advancements, you'll see that nothing really changes outside of some cooldowns go lower. So you can see increase Sparky's basic attack damage to 182%, and then weapon cooldown reduced to 24 seconds. Increase the weapon's base attack growth. That means 2. We can skip over 2 and 4. We know those are pretty static. Except that, Ruby is treated much like every other ranged unit in this game is ever treated, which is kind of annoying, where they get, attack weapon growth. If you're not a melee character, melee usually gets HP growth in the middle, which is kind of a pain, but it is what it is. So Scorching Heat. Identical fire increased by 18%. Scorch Settlement multiplier increased to 150%. Again, multiplier increase, damage increase, nothing too crazy there. Each time Sparky's basic attack hits an enemy or hits a unit, 75 weapon charge is restored, and that has a 0.9 second internal cooldown, and then Shatter is increased by 25%. So again, nothing that actually changes the way the character works. It's just increasing values. Shatter, I guess I can talk about Shatter now in the mix of all this, where I mentioned that Ruby's not just here for shattering. You're just going to shatter units. When you're playing the comps properly and you have all portions of the comps available to you, you're just going to naturally shatter units as you go through your standard rotation. You're not going to switch to a specific weapon to shatter in this situation and then move back. That's why comps are a little weird right now over on global. But if you watch a lot of CN comps, you'll see that they're not swapping to a specific unit to shatter. It's just they're getting shatter in vain, like just doing their proper rotation. Any piece of content that requires shatter is going to be built to have a role for that. That's where you're going to have the fortitude roll come out and be more useful, more prevalent in certain pieces of content, because you're going to want to be able to shatter, and they're going to have buffs to their shatter, where again, they're not going to have to worry about switching to a shatter weapon. They just have insane buffs to shatter, where they'll be able to shatter the shields anyway, along with a bit of your help as to your normal damage rotation. This is the case in things like I believe hard mode void, hard mode raid. This is going to happen as well. Like, as you get your proper comps, you're just going to shatter, so it's not really going to be a big deal. And then the final update, or the upgrade, is increase Sparky's basic attack damage to 240% and double the effectiveness of heat. Weapon skill cooldown reduced to 16 seconds. So again, all of this doesn't really change the way Ruby plays. It just increases damage, lowers cooldown. That's why people have said multiple times that Ruby works at 0-star investment, because nothing realistically changes outside of her cooldown and her damage. Granted, those are two very important things, but you can still effectively play her without, all of those things. When it comes to, like Cobalt, like, her extra burn doesn't even work really well unless you have her A6. While it does work with A3, technically speaking, you can absolutely, get the burn going from getting, I think, full weapon charge, and then going into like your step attack to go ahead and get the Iron Scorch stuff. It's not really that great. So getting the burn from using Barrage, which honestly, I wish this was like way lower down. Like, I wish this was swapped. This would make Cobalt such an easier unit to use at lower investment. But if this was reduced, like if this was swapped over here and this was like just damage at A6 and then you had this effect at A1, Cobalt would be a much easier unit to invest in. But because you don't have that, you've got to go all the way over to A6 to make Cobalt really useful on the team. Now, that doesn't say that you can't use her. She's just kind of gimped without it. Ruby does not have this problem. At A0, she works, which is why most people are going to tell you when you're looking at investing in Ruby, A0, then get chips. So let's talk about chips. So Ruby's chips, after using weapon skill, flame attack is increased for 25 seconds. The effect works in the background, and if multiple sets are used, the highest star value will take effect. So Ruby, you're able to so the second sentence here is just so you can't use two sets of the chips. You want to have the highest star value, essentially. So this effect here works in the background. 2-piece Ruby just gives you flame attack after using a weapon skill. Super dope. This is something that you're going to have on a unit like your Cobalt. Essentially, you'll have the chipset on Cobalt. Cobalt will apply the burn because you use her skill, applies burn. This continues to work in the background, and it's like one of the first things you're going to do. So it's going to buff all of your flame attack for the flame comp. 4-piece. After releasing a weapon skill, gain mastery for 15 seconds. Cooldown 15 seconds. While mastery's active, successful basic attacks increase flame damage by 4, 5, 6, and 7%. Up to 6 stacks with a cooldown of 0.2 seconds between the stacks. At 6 stacks, gain a shield that resists damage one time, and mastery cannot be stacked. And different levels of mastery share cooldown. So again, this is mostly just so you can't stack this effect with having multiple sets of these chips. But TLDR, again, you simply just do what you normally would do and you gain damage. You're gaining flame damage. It stacks up to 6 stacks, has an internal cooldown time between stacks, and at the max stacks you get a shield. Very useful, very easy, very straightforward. This is what I mean by this isn't something you're going to have to be too complicated about. Just toss the 4 chipset on Cobalt and you're good to go. Assuming, of course, you're using an A6 Cobalt. Even if you're not using A6 Cobalt, if you're using a Cobalt at all, just toss it on Cobalt. So when you're looking at team comps, why did I pull 0 in here? Well, let me change up this order. If you're looking at team comps, let's say you're a whale, someone who's just bought every unit A6, your best choice that you're going to run with Ruby and Cobalt, because Ruby and Cobalt are going to be run together, you're going to get these two together for sure, is going to be Claudia. Claudia provides Grievous. It is just her skill. You basically swap to Claudia, press her skill, get her discharge, swap off of Claudia. That's it. That's all she's here to do. That's all you're going to do with her. Anything outside of that, you're kind of like, you're wasting any other stacks you could be using. Like, you don't want to burn your dash attack or anything along those lines. Because you really want to use those with Ruby and Cobalt. Cobalt to, of course, start up your Iron Scorch, and Ruby to maintain it as you're moving forward. You may do 1 or 2 with Claudia, but that's mostly just going to be able to get the step attack and then move forward. Now, I mentioned 0 here because one thing a lot of people have overlooked, funny enough, was they talk about, or it gets talked about, I guess, are things like Coco Ritter, Tsubasa. Tsubasa is really good, but even if I had the choice of picking up Tsubasa, I'd still take 0. And the reason for it is one thing Flames comp is actually missing is sustain. You don't have a way of healing yourself in this team at all. Until Anibal comes out, you have basically 0 sustain. And when Lin comes out, you're going to replace this third unit with Lin anyway, so you're going to go back to 0 sustain. It's nice to have it at least for a little while. Maybe you don't want to have it so you don't get used to it, but it's definitely a nice choice to have in the back pocket. Now, 0 is only useful for not only sustain, but damage at A5. At A5, he actually also produces a damage orb that lasts 20 seconds and increases all damage and healing of any teammate who picks it up by 2% for 30 seconds. Stacks up to 10 times, meaning it's 20% damage buff, which is super awesome. And you can maintain it by just picking up an orb every, 10 seconds or so. And technically every 30 seconds or so, but the orbs only last for 20 seconds. So don't let them sit on the ground too long, but as long as you're in combat, you'll be able to get some damage. That not only supports yourself, but it supports your team, so it's useful in single and multiplayer. But it also is another flame unit. Outside of that, 0 is really not great. Like you get some heals. His 1 gives you a shield, which is really nice. So unless you're, at least a 1-0, I wouldn't look into this because a 1-0 is what you need to be able to get the heals. A 5-0 is kind of like the ideal spot you want to be in to be able to use 0 in this comp. And then of course A6 is just a nice little extra bonus. Eventually you'll get to this point when it comes to standard units. I guess again, other options you can kind of toss in here. Huma's not a bad choice, but Huma really doesn't do a whole lot for this comp. While you're running Cobalt, you could run Huma instead of King if you had a high investment Huma, but Huma's not really super amazing for this. King, again, a decent choice, but this is another situation where it just depends on what you're going for. You're not really using King for a ton of damage. Most people use him for like quick shatter to the swap to use a skill and then swap off of him. That's why a lot of people look at a lot of units as shatter, but realistically that's not always the case. His 1 skill also just does quite a bit of damage too, so he's not a bad unit, but again, it's just not, he doesn't really fit into anything that helps this team do anything else, right? He just kind of does his own thing when you're looking at his advancements. Unlike, Ruby and Cobalt, who kind of like, Cobalt kind of sets up Fire Team, and Ruby kind of can help you just keep pushing it forward and doesn't really have anything else that's going to get in the way of what Cobalt wants to do. So they kind of go well together. King, not a bad choice, but again, just kind of like a consolation prize to this process. Coco, also something worth mentioning. Coco at 6-star investment does have that damage buff that's super nice, but this is kind of like, doesn't matter, like it fits into any team in that situation. If you just don't have anything else, damage buff plus some healing, not a bad choice. Tsubasa, at least at A3. A1 gets you a damage buff and it stacks up per time that's hit. But A3 means you launch 3 dodge attacks with a single dodge attack, or you launch 3 charge attacks with a single dodge attack. So you don't use up all of your dodge attacks, which you need to maintain your damage buff for Cobalt, and you want to be specifically using on Ruby because that's where your good chips are going to be. So while this isn't bad, this does kind of hinder your process, so you want to be careful there. And that's really all there is to talk about when it comes to Ruby. Should you pull for her? Yes, she is the core of Fire Team. You need her. You absolutely want her. If your question is, should you pull for Ruby and Lin? The answer is technically both. Lin, it fits into a ton of teams. If you're primarily going to play Fire and you just want to play Fire, Ruby is more important. She's going to be the more important unit. Get her at least at A0, get her chips, and you're good to go. Anything extra past that is just extra damage. I would say, A3 is cool because you get the skin, but there's a good chance we're going to get the extra Ruby skin that you can just buy if you really want to. So if the skin is really your problem, by all means, there's a possibility we may be able to get the extra skin anyway, so don't worry too much about it. But yeah, definitely at least get A0 Ruby. A1 to 3 is good investment. Anything past that is pretty much just I don't want to say it's just for whales, but it's like you're really going into a situation where it's not absolutely necessary. So it's luxury, I guess is the word I'm looking for. I'm really bad at outros, guys. This video's gone on longer than I wanted it to, but let me know if you guys have any questions. Leave it in the comments below. Anything that I possibly missed. I'm not perfect. I do mess things up. By all means, please let me know if there's anything I missed. Like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe to keep up with more. I'll see you guys next time. Take care. Peace out.